Hi, I'm Courtney Bailey, Chief Development Officer for MPTF. What you're about to hear is one of the panels that took place during our recent women's conference, Deal With It, on July 28, 2019. Madeline Hammond, who produces the conference, took great care to make sure we found the best speakers to cover the most relevant topics of today. This event is for the betterment of women in the entertainment industry, but there is such great information here that can really help everybody. So listen, enjoy, and most importantly, feel free to pass it along to someone who may benefit from this information as well. We really think you'll enjoy today's podcast as you learn what it takes to become a Rockstar boss. Today you'll be listening to a discussion that was recorded live, so be kind. There may be areas where the audio drops out a bit or an audience member's question is hard to hear, but don't worry, you'll definitely get the context of what the panel is about. MPTF is providing this podcast as a public service, but it is neither a legal interpretation nor a statement of MPTF policy. Reference to any specific product or entity does not constitute an endorsement or recommendation by MPTF. The views expressed by our guests are their own, and their appearance on the program does not imply an endorsement of them or any entity they represent. Views and opinions expressed by MPTF employees are those of the employees and do not necessarily reflect the view of MPTF or any of its officials. Thank you for listening.
Are we ready to get started? Okay, if for some reason you can't hear anything or if you need anything, just raise your hand and we'll accommodate. I'm Kymn Goldstein, and I'm the Chief Operating Officer of Allied Global Marketing, and I am your moderator for this panel, and I'd like to introduce you to our panelists. To my right is Sandra Dewey, President, Production and Business Operations for WarnerMedia. Then we have Aleen Keshishian. Who's founder and CEO of Lighthouse Management Media. And at the end, we have Marisa McGrath Liston, who is Executive Vice President of Global Communication and Earned Media for Lionsgate. Welcome to the panel, ladies. Thank you all for coming.
Yay.
This panel's called What It Takes to Be a Rockstar Boss. And before we start, I think it's important just to talk about, in the little description it says whether you're the boss or a team member, you can make a difference. Even toxic situations can be made healthy and proactive and emotionally intelligent leadership. Hear from the most well-respected executives how they create a better workplace for everyone. And I don't know if anybody on this panel would define themselves as a rockstar boss, but just to make it a little bit more inclusive, I think for the purpose of the panel, I think we want to, when we say rockstar boss, we want to think about, women who we find inspirational, motivational, and I think that qualities that are aspirational for us all, so that whether you're actually managing people or working with people, it's things that we can all sort of ascribe to and work towards. So that's kind of, we're all part of this, and we're all like trying to become rockstar bosses. So Sandra, just at the offset, what do you think separates a rockstar boss from everybody else?
Well, I think people who are really rock star bosses understand, first of all, and this sounds like stating the obvious, but I think it's far too rare. I think they understand it's not about them. And that means looking at how you lead other people from the perspective of not just your personal success and not even really the success of the business objective, that you are charged with a bigger purpose, which is inspiring and leading your entire team to do the best that they can do, and also to grow in their roles. And I think very few people do that, actually.
I think very few people do that too. Aleen, are there traits that you think are important, and then are there traits that you think are crucial?
Well, I would say, for me, just having worked for several different bosses, many of whom were amazing, a couple were not so amazing, I think I would say it's just the way we think of surviving in life, right? And noticing people's strengths and not expecting everyone to be perfect in everything. Because if you think about it, we all have things we love to do or we're good at, and then we have things that we're not so good at, and or maybe we just don't enjoy it. So rather than just, to me, it's about not having a cookie cutter approach. and really looking at an individual and figuring out what they bring and what makes them unique and what makes them a superstar, and then creating a team where everyone has different strengths and they feel okay about asking somebody who knows more than they do about something. So that's to me the key, and I've had bosses that haven't done that, and I think, to me, I just want to make sure that that's the way you lead.
Okay, so let's talk about the bosses that have first, and maybe you want to start by talking about, because you've had some incredible bosses. Mm-hmm. I know women that and men, we should say women and men, who you've learned a lot from. Can you talk a little bit about that, and then we'll talk about the other bosses as well, because I think, you know, we can all agree that all bosses, you can learn something from everybody, so. Mm-hmm.
I think my first boss was a woman named Juliette Taylor, and she was thought of as being one of the best casting directors in the business. And I remember being struck by how humble she was. She wore little t-shirts and jeans. She thought of herself as just a regular gal, and that humility really struck me, and I thought, oh, okay, it's because she has such confidence and she knows she's the best, but she didn't feel the need to prove it, and there was also no fear in how she felt about what she did. She just had this very quiet inner confidence. So that was something I always admired. And then my second boss was a man named Sam Cohn, who was in New York at ICM. He was one of the founders, and he was a big snob, a real intellectual, loved artists, loved the arts, and he just taught me about passion and trusting your own instinct. So when I would meet an artist that I thought, okay, this person could be a star, and they had done nothing, the West Coast bosses would say, oh, you can't represent that person, wait to see if they are successful. And Sam would say, trust your instinct, always don't be afraid of doing something even if no one else understands it. And every time he supported me in signing unknown artists that then became very successful, and I don't think I would have had that strength or confidence without him. And on the flip side, I won't name the names of bosses that I haven't loved, but one of the traits was at the end of every year, this boss would have each employee come in, and he would essentially just tell you everything that was wrong with you. Like, you haven't done this, you haven't brought in enough money, you know, who do you represent? You represent just these people. And everyone would leave sort of crushed and feeling like, I can't do anything right, rather than saying, okay, here are the things I've noticed that you've done this year that were spectacular, this. What are your goals for the following year? How can we help you? And maybe, you know, focus on this a little bit more. So that, to me, I believe in criticism, but I also believe in constructive criticism and giving somebody a path to actually improve on those things.
Marisa, anybody that you want to?
I would say that I've had 3 bosses that shaped my life. My very first boss, when I first kind of got to Hollywood, I actually had a very, I keenly grew aware very immediately that everything that she did, I would do the opposite. I just saw her take her business from flourishing, and it just basically kind of collapsed because she just, she was insecure, she kept lying about things, and she was smart enough to make it work for a while, but she just kept digging these holes. And then I went over and I worked for a woman named Nancy Ryder, who was, in my opinion, the best personal publicist in town. And I learned so much from her because she was a confident woman, a very confident woman who also was not afraid to admit when she was wrong. And I'll just never forget, you know, certain times I'll see her and she'd have her, you know, her Louis Vuittons on and her dress, and she exuded this power and confidence. And I'd be in her office dealing with something, and she'd get on the phone and she'd call Brian Lord or somebody, and she literally would just say, I fucked up. Like, I messed up. And it was like, and then all of a sudden, all the power came back to her because she admitted she was wrong and she formulated a plan. And it's just something I would never forget, because I kind of pictured her as, she's never going to admit that she's wrong. And she did every time, but it always came back to her. And then I went over to Sony, where I basically spent the bulk of my career for 17 years And I ended up with a gentleman named Andre Caraco as my mentor and my boss and my lifelong friend, and I just couldn't have been luckier. And he's just somebody that I really understood the term emotional intelligence, because he is emotionally intelligent through and through and has all the qualities in a boss that I hope that I can glean some of that, because I think I just got really, really lucky. And he's gone on to great things, and I think of him almost every day in certain circumstance and how I would handle something. So.
So I live in his house. How weird is that?
You live in his house?
Yeah, I bought my house from him.
Ah, okay. I'll let him know.
Just how weird life is.
It's a very small world.
So let's talk about, you mentioned it, you mentioned about learning a lot from a boss that wasn't the greatest.
Yeah.
And not all of us have the opportunity to work with for the best boss, and oftentimes we have to work with people who are not always the best people. Let's talk about playing the cards that are dealt you, and making something out of perhaps situations that are not ideal or not the way that we think that they're supposed to be. You want to start with that?
Well, sure. I like my partners up here have worked for some not great bosses, and as much as everyone hates to hear it, those experiences, I think, teach you as much, if not more, than what you learn from working for really great bosses. But that doesn't mean, we all appreciate those great bosses, but you're in a learning situation in both. And, I think I was telling you when we spoke on the phone earlier that I sometimes have the experience in my job of having people come to me and expressing discontent or unhappiness or an inability to succeed because they're reporting to someone that they think is not a good boss, that's unfair or treats them poorly or is self-interested or whatever it may be. And we don't have the luxury frequently, especially in these big companies, of choosing who we report to. And so that's one of those situations where I think the best help is to speak realistically and give a little bit of tough love. But I say, we want to believe everything's going to be fair and that this is going to be set up for you in a way where you're going to succeed, but that's not how this works. But this is an opportunity for you to learn and advance yourself in a different way than maybe you would like. But if you can tell yourself that this is an opportunity, that you're going to find a way to succeed even with this person and the obstacles that are in front of you, you are going to walk away from this situation with a skill set that you did not have before. And I know that's how I approached it when I had very difficult bosses, that I went into my space and, you can't function if you're just feeling bad and feeling, sorry for yourself, you're not going to be able to do a great job. But if you retreat and you say, I'm going to treat this as an opportunity and I'm going to find ways to be successful and work with this person, that is a great skill set to have, to be able to accomplish what you need to in spite of it and take it as an opportunity for growth. Of course, in an extreme situation, we all know there are situations where you shouldn't just be living with what's happening. That's a different set of circumstances, something you would have to confront or address. But oftentimes we get stuck with someone who's way less than ideal, and we have to find our path to succeed.
So if it's not an extreme situation, it's just terrible. Mm-hmm. Terrible for you personally. What are some of the things, or do you have any advice for people in terms of how they should go about trying to make things better? In the last session, there was some discussion about women versus men and how we tend to react to situations versus how a man might react to a situation. Mm-hmm. But how as women can we exert some sort of power? How do we take our power back in those situations?
Well, look, I think that we all, if you're really going to be great at your job, and it doesn't matter what your job is, I think we're all charged with being intuitive people and being learners, watching who we work with and understanding that you don't behave the same way in every situation. Because if I said to you, here's how you do it, that's not going to be true in each of these different circumstances. I think we all have to be reading what we can do, and so I can only speak a little bit for myself, and it's obviously different when you're a person that has some seniority and some voice. It's more difficult if you're a person who's more junior in an organization. But I will say, I think over the course of my whole career, I have been pretty brave about being direct about things. It's the work that goes into doing that properly and in a way that's going to be effective. And so even now in my work life, there are situations that I decide need to be confronted, which doesn't mean that, you can just walk in and say to someone, you're a jackass, you're not leading properly. I mean, that we don't have that latitude usually, but if you are waiting for the right moment where you can say to this person in a way that they're not going to be defensive, for example, and you get your timing right and you prepare what you're going to say, then you have an opportunity to say, I think it will help you to understand how your behavior is impacting this group and the effectiveness of what we're doing. And let me just lay this out for you, and you choose your words carefully. I think we're living in a time where a little more direct confrontation of some of these issues is warranted, and but you have to decide what the risks and benefit are. But a little bit of confrontation right now to change some of these structural dynamics that we've lived in that have been less than ideal, I think the time is right for that.
I can add to that. I mean, I think that, while my immediate boss, Andre Caraco, was fabulous, I had some tough bosses above him. And I think one thing that we can own is our relationships. And I know oftentimes I would be in a situation where I would have the higher ups boss would say, don't call her back, or forget about that, or just dump that, or see if they can do this for free, or anything like that. And you're sitting there with like, okay, well, but the head boss is telling me to do this, but like, God, it just doesn't feel right. And, I'm not saying go against your boss, but I am saying go against your boss. Like, I mean, because that's all you have. Like, that's all, at the end of the day, whether you quit or you get fired, you have your relationships and your integrity and your reputation. And so it doesn't mean, so for me, I think anytime I would hear something like that just intuitively felt wrong, it maybe meant that we weren't going to enter into business with this certain person, but instead of just not calling them back, I would call them back, and I would do it the way that I wanted to do it. And so, without being disrespectful to your boss, I just also think that if you care about your relationships and your reputation, don't let what somebody else thinks that you should do guide you. Stay true to who you are, and if who you are is the person who would call and let them know what's up instead of just ghosting them, then that's what you should do. And I think that's one thing that I had done even through kind of my last tenure at Sony for the last 5 years, where I had upper bosses where I just did not agree with their business acumen and how they would deal with things, and I stayed very true to how I would deal with them. And it's the one thing that I can actually be really proud of, was kind of not doing business the way that they wanted me to do business.
On that front, I wanted to say that I've had situations where I have two bosses and they have diametrically opposed styles and things you're supposed to do.
Oh, yes.
So you have one saying, do it this way, and the other one saying, do it that way. And how do you deal with that? It's like having parents, right? And one thing I found is, first of all, I've also had bosses that I feel like the ones that are difficult are the ones that have fear, insecurity, and they have stuff going on outside of work. It has nothing to do with you. And I say this to people that work with me or for me, do not take anything personally, okay? Because people have all sorts of shit going on in their life. It has nothing to do with you. So when you're told to do something and you don't like the way someone's telling you, or they're reacting badly, or they want to make it all about themselves, or they're taking credit for something they didn't do, really step back and do not take it personally. That's their issue, right? And the second thing I would say is find ways to be indispensable to each of those different people. So even if somebody's difficult, it's a little bit like, as you said, like Andre, it's emotional intelligence. So look at that person and try to find something about them that has made them in that position, right? They've obviously done something right. And what can you learn from, and how can you help them, and how can you, I'm not saying like flatter them, but find what they're actually good at and find a way that you can participate or you can help them. And then the second thing I'll say is, if somebody is really horrific, try to not work for them. Try to get because it's not going to change overnight.
Yeah.
And if you're stuck working for somebody, I say before somebody takes a job at a lower level, don't work for someone that has never promoted someone. There are head of agencies that are at the top of what they do. They're the president. Look and see, have they ever promoted someone? The answer is no. And then there are other people where they have 50 people that are their disciples. Go work for that person. Go and say, I'll start at the very, very bottom. And in the beginning, start at the bottom, but pick out who's the best and get a job as the intern for the best person, instead of getting a better job for someone that isn't going to lead you down the right way. Because the good people know all these other good people, and then you'll get promoted, and it might not be your direct boss, but other people will see how good you are, even if you don't report to them, when you're helpful to them, even if they're not your, direct boss.
That's really great. I'm going to take that advice. While we're on it, so do you have a boss right now?
No.
You're your own boss.
I'm my own boss. It's fun. I can come in late.
So you're 100% sort of in charge of your own culture, so to speak, at your company. Can you talk about how do you work with your team and your employees to ensure that your vision and what you see for your company is sort of played out?
Well, the one thing I'll say is I have a small company. We have about 120 clients, but we have 11 employees. And but it's the model. There are two things. One is the model, which I think works, which is financially, we all pool everything. So it's kind of like there's no ego or ownership of this is my client or this is just mine. And I think it's much better for the clients because, as I said, we get to use the expertise of each person. So even if it's not their responsible client, I have somebody who's really great at digital, or somebody that's great in music or marketing or brands, someone who's great at doing notes on scripts. We kind of pool all of our resources. That's the first thing. And then the second thing is, I do like to praise people, both in terms of words, but also in terms of bonuses and being really generous. For me, I find that if you overpay someone, they're much happier, okay? So, I mean, that's number one. Number two, let people take time off or vacations. I've never once said no to someone saying, can I have 2 weeks to go to Mykonos? I'm like, I would love to do that one day, but you should do it if that's what you want to do, as long as you can give your work to someone else, or if you're reachable in case of an emergency or question. So time off, paying people well, and praising them for the things that they have done well.
We're going to have a lot of applicants. I'm thinking about retiring my senior level job.
Right, who's the 12th person? The 12th person is in this room. It's under your seat. It's going to be announced at the end. Yeah, that's really, really great. Really great to hear that you do that. So, we talk a little bit about wanting to be a rock star boss, and some people are like, screw that, I just want to be a boss. How do I get to be a boss, So, Sandra, do you want to talk a little bit about, sort of, because you didn't have a traditional journey of being like, I want to be that person.
No, I didn't.
Okay, so can you share a little bit about how you got to where you are?
Well, I was telling Kym when we were talking before this that I think my path is a little different than probably most of you sitting here, who I assume are all, hardworking and ambitious and expecting to and desirous of, working up to higher levels in your professions. I came to Los Angeles I grew up in a small town, and I went to law school, and I came to Los Angeles to work at a law firm. And this world was very foreign to me. I mean, I would never have even dreamed of working in the entertainment business. That was far outside what would have been realistic from where I'm from, really. And so in the early phases of my career, I was very hardworking, and I was someone who would really deliver, but I wasn't necessarily trying to advance myself. I just didn't view myself that way. I didn't have those kind of ambitions, nor did I really understand it, I think. But I was telling Kym that during the time, I worked at my law firm, and then I've worked in the Turner, Time Warner world now for 25 years. But I had already reached a certain level of seniority. This was now about 14 years ago. And I went to a leadership conference that was for the senior women at our company from HBO and Warner Brothers and Turner and Time Inc. At the time. There was maybe 20 or 25 of us. And it was a week-long program, a leadership program, and it was taken very seriously by our company. The then chairman of Time Warner, Dick Parsons, came and spent time with us over this week. And one of the women asked, why women? Why not just leaders from the company? And Dick Parsons said, we've done a lot of looking at the research about who best succeeds in running these businesses and how women are underrepresented, and we're trying to understand why. Anyway, during the course of that week, when they were talking about the qualities that it takes to really succeed and run a business, it's not what we all think, that you have to be expert at what you're doing. I think there is a certain level of table stakes. You obviously have to be very good at what you do. But in terms of leading these businesses successfully, all of the research was pointing towards skills that are, this is a generalization, but are commonly identified with women, being empathic leaders and looking at the whole organization and being good listeners and managing people properly. And the more he talked, the more I felt like he was talking to me, like, that's who I am, that's what I do, that's what I can really succeed at. And in a true sense of having an epiphany, I decided in that conference, that leadership organization, that meeting, that I was a leader. I didn't see myself that way until I was there. And the more that happened, the more it unfolded, the more I was, 100% I'm a leader. And he also said at that conference, Dick Parsons told us, if you can lead one business, you can lead any business. And women tend to circumscribe what they do because they want to be really good at it before they do it. But he was saying, if you have these things, you can lead any business. And so it was nothing that anyone else saw. It was an internal shift. It was just a change in how I viewed myself. And when I went back to my job, I did it differently because I perceived myself as a leader, and I changed my behavior to assume, number one, that I had a seat at the table and that I had something meaningful to say, and that how I managed people was an important contribution to the company. And I think it changed my level of confidence. And I can tell you that small shift changed my career, because from that point forward, then I really advanced very quickly. And so it speaks a lot to how it doesn't really matter what your level is. It's understanding what it takes to be a leader and finding your confidence and your belief in yourself that, you belong in that role, and shaping your behavior to that, advocating for yourself. But it was meaningful to me, and I think it's really important for us all to understand that sometimes just changing some measure of our own thinking can really change the trajectory of your career.
That's interesting. Yeah.
So as women, if we naturally have this ability to lead and be good bosses, why aren't more of us in that position? Both in terms of ascending to be bosses, but also in terms of being viewed as really good bosses. Does anyone have any?
Well, I think it takes emotional intelligence and that type of insight to identify exactly what you said. So I think you're asking a great question, but it just means that the people who are identifying the leaders have to understand all of that.
Yeah.
And it sounds like Dick Parsons did.
Well, I think it's worth mentioning that was 14 years ago, and the company had obviously invested time and resources to try to make a shift. And I say with, some deep sadness that statistically, because I know my company very well, the percentages of women in leadership roles have changed virtually not at all during that period. And I do have a strong view about your question. I think there are women who are really advancing. There's many more senior leaders than there used to be. And I can say that within my own company, for a long time, I was one of the very few senior women. More often than not, I was the only woman in a room, when there were senior leadership issues. But now we have many fantastic women leaders, and it's awe-inspiring to watch. They are great at their jobs. Not everyone, but just killer. And I will venture to say, much better than many of the men in senior positions. But that last level, that very senior level at all the media companies, at the big entertainment companies, that is one that's very tough to crack. And I think my belief is that the reason why it doesn't happen is because ultimately the people who are replacing themselves in those jobs, no matter how much work we do, their perception of what leaders look like are people like themselves. And so they are choosing who their successors are. And there is even beneath that a path to, the people who they spend time with are largely people who they have a comfort level with and who look like them. And so, we as women, I think, are really successful in bringing our good work and how well we're managing people up to the level beneath that, where the companies and those leaders are getting the benefit of all the great work that we're doing, but not ascending to that last level. And I think, there has to be some real systemic change. People have to really kick those doors down. No one is going to hand it over. I'm sad to say, this is just my opinion, obviously, but.
Aleen?
I was going to say, at one of my companies, before I started my own, I remember asking some very basic questions about the company. I was a partner, and what I was told by my male boss was, oh, you don't need to know that. That's really tough and confusing and difficult, and don't worry about it. And this female that's, at your level, at the top of the company, she doesn't care about any of that. So just focus on what you're doing. And I remember at the time thinking, okay, financially, my clients are bringing in the most money to this company. I'm asking a very basic question. And just because I'm a woman doesn't mean that I shouldn't be asking that question, because again, my predecessor, who was a woman, maybe didn't give a shit or didn't understand or didn't want to understand. And so I remember having to really fight for that voice. And then when I wanted to start my own company, I was told by that same person, it is really, really difficult. You do not want to do that. You have no idea how hard it is to get the accounting set up, to have to make, all of those things. Starting your own company is not easy. So for many years, 3 or 4 years, I thought, yeah, it must be a pain in the ass. I'm not going to do it. I'm so busy. I have so much to do. I'm not going to think about it. And then finally, 2 or 3 clients said to me, you really need to do this. You have to do this. And then my son, who at the time was very young, said, Mom, if you don't do it now, you're never going to do it. So then I thought, oh God, this 12-year-old is telling me I have to do it. What kind of role model will I be? So then that was like the kick in my butt. And once I did it, it was so much easier than had been kind of told by this person who I now realized was just kind of holding me down because I was making them millions and millions and millions of dollars. So the day that I did it, I didn't realize it was a feminist statement at all. To me, it was just like, okay, I'm doing what I have to do because my 12-year-old son told me I have to do it. And then I started getting these ridiculous calls from people I barely knew. Katy Perry sent me a plaque that's in my office now, that says, I'm not bossy, I'm the boss, okay? All these famous, wonderful female leaders in their field started saying, you go girl, and I didn't realize that it was a big deal that I was gonna have a female-owned company, right? That I didn't need the backing of a man, and I never in my life thought, okay, I wish there were more women doing what I'm doing, or I'm the only woman doing it. I sort of just did it. Right? And I do think that subconsciously, as a woman doing it, we have to be stronger. You can't show your emotion. Otherwise people will say, is it that time of the month? Or, you get this weird discrimination. So you just have to plow forward. But I have to say, I think the fear is what holds a lot of women back. And you're kind of told either explicitly or implicitly that don't worry about it. It's hard to do my job.
That's a good point.
Meanwhile, women are so much more capable than men on doing so many more things. I mean, bless my husband, but I accomplish more in a day than he does in a week. And so that's why I just think it's like, so,
That's such a good comment. I remember my husband, I gave him 3 things to do, and he's pretty brilliant. And he said, I have 20 emails right now, I can't deal. And I was like, come look at mine, I have 30,000, okay? So like the ability to manage multiple things, I do feel like we're just better suited to it genetically.
Genetically, I truly believe that. I mean, as with our maternal instincts and everything like that, we're just able to juggle things a lot better than men. I just think we are more capable beings.
Can I also just? Do you want to talk about your husband? No, I do not. But I was just going to laugh for a second about the trope about women being emotional. I mean, I don't know about anyone else's experience, but I don't know if we as women have trained ourselves to really be disciplined about our emotions in the workplace. But I, on a regular basis, look at some of the emotional outbursts from the men that I work with, and I say, and I'm always thinking, and we're emotional, and the women are poised and articulate and professional, and no matter what's happening, you know, the ground is shaking under their feet, and they deliver, and I'm just like, wow. And this myth continues. It's crazy. And also, I will say one other thing about the crying thing is I've worked hard. I now have 2 layers of bosses above me, but for many, many years, I was the boss in Los Angeles. So I will immodestly say I think I had a big hand in shaping the culture at our particular group in Los Angeles, which has historically had a really strong culture and been a place where people really love to work. Which I'm very proud of. But I don't believe that it's a bad thing for someone to shed tears sometimes. So when people come, I very recently, within the last 2 weeks, had a senior woman come in my office, and she was very upset, and she was trying so hard not to cry. And she was saying, I'm sorry, I don't usually do this, you know, I don't, and I said, sometimes tears are the appropriate response to what's happening. You do not have to apologize for that. I think we all have to shift our thinking to understand that being good at our jobs doesn't mean we have to sit on our tears or play this. We have to deliver at our jobs. We have to be really good at our jobs. And then we have to be unapologetic about the rest. The two can live side by side. We are allowed to be real people. We're allowed to shed tears. We're allowed to have children. So I think, you know, all of these things we try to twist ourselves into a pretzel to be is unnecessary. We need to shape the culture of these companies so that we can be real people with all of these things and be very good at our jobs and have that recognized, you know, in my view.
Yeah. I also think when somebody said, it might have been Aleen, when we talked about reaching certain positions, you know, and how you didn't realize that, you know, you got all of those sort of kudos from the strong women around you, clients, and I think that is kind of the case. Like, we often don't think about it, but when I see a woman get a big job, I'm like, good for her, right? And I do think to get sort of bumped up to that last level, or the desired level that everybody's trying to keep us out of, you know, it requires a push sort of from the sisterhood that came up in the last session. So I do think that that's important. Marisa, can you talk a little bit about sort of how do we do that, or how do you do that as a boss with your team and with your colleagues that you work with? Yeah,
I mean, it's so interesting because and it's interesting, Sandra said that, you know, bosses often replace their replacements are like them. And at Sony, I worked underneath Amy Pascal, who is just brilliant and lovely and crazy and all of these high level emotions all mixed together, and I loved her. And you know, she ended up leaving and someone else came in, and that person that came in would often sit around a table and say things like, we need more women. We need more women at this table, and we need more diversity. And in the time that I was there, I saw them replace high-level people with people that were exactly like him. And so, you know, you can't just say that you want it and not do it. And at Sony, for all its wonderful things, because it was wonderful and it still is wonderful, the one thing that I didn't feel, though, and maybe perhaps because it was so big, I think maybe that has something to do with it, I didn't feel like a female camaraderie there at all. I think I definitely felt it more when Amy was there, for reasons that make sense. When I made the shift over to Lionsgate, I immediately felt a couple things, and it's something that Aleen brought up. When I first sat down to meet with HR, she had brought up this women's group, and she had said, they could really use someone like you. And I'm thinking, but I don't, why me? I didn't, it's kind of like sometimes you don't understand the position that you hold until somebody else tells you that, right? You didn't think it was a big deal that you opened up your own company until people were telling you that. And I think for me, I just was coming into this position, and I didn't realize that it was that me coming into this position actually would make me the right fit to sit on the Lionsgate Women's Board. I didn't connect those two. And then as soon as she said that, it kind of all made sense. And as soon as I looked at the structure of the company, and it's much smaller, and there are a lot of high-level females, which was great, but I could tell that they needed engagement. And so I think for me, that's something that I really want, that I'm excited about at Lionsgate, is it's actually small enough for me to wrap my hands around. And it's small enough that I feel like I can probably have an impact. And if I can have an impact, and actually they're all here, and inspire them and help kind of create this camaraderie and this support for our colleagues and for females, that I actually feel like I can actually be impactful. And so I don't mind putting my energies there. I think at Sony sometimes you felt like you'd put your energy someplace, but the machine was so big you weren't going to make a difference. So.
And you want to talk about, because Turner has some other things that are similar that support women. Do you want to talk about how?
Yeah. Well, there's a couple great organizations at Turner that I'm super proud to have been, a part of. But the one that I'll tell you, our most recent one, we have a Turner Women's Group that was started actually by when I was telling you guys the story about 14 years ago, that thing that I went to with Dick Parsons. There was a woman at Turner who I didn't know who was in that same group with me, and she was based in Atlanta, where Turner has been based historically. And she went back and started this organization called Turner Women Today. And so I helped her. It was her, idea and her sort of brainchild, but I started the LA division of that. And since then, the Turner Women organization has grown to have just hundreds of people and all kinds of great divisions of it. We do mentoring and speaking. They're speaking, and it's a whole now big machine, and very effective at supporting the women in the organization. But recently, I think maybe 2 years ago, I'm looking at you guys, and it happened casually. It sort of came to be in the advent of everyone's anxiety around our elections and Me Too and things like that. People were kind of wearing their political T-shirts to the office under a suit. And so, and there was a lot more discussion amongst the women about what was happening. And so I I went to one of the very junior people at our office, and I said, let's host a feminist tea party. We're going to have a proper tea party, but we're going to talk about, how we're doing and how we can support each other. And so we had this really great event, and all the women came. And at that time, I sort of earmarked Friday. I said, look, let's just, not in any formal way, but let's just earmark Friday as the day that we all know, we're there for each other. If there's an issue, we can forward around stuff that we read or things that we want to share with one another. And so we created this Feminist Friday newsletter that gets circulated every Friday that's got information that we share. And it became a movement within our company. Now the younger women have completely taken it over, which is fabulous. And so we have informal get-togethers, and we have more formal get-togethers, and sometimes we have speakers. We took a self-defense class. We have great people come and talk. But what it is a tremendous, it's created a bond amongst the women. It's reinforced this notion that success is not a zero-sum game. There's room for all of us to succeed, and we're each other's biggest cheerleaders, and all of those things that ultimately become so meaningful and help the women, whatever your level is, to advance in your career. You have people to talk to. I wish I had that when I was coming up. I didn't. I was trying to figure everything out on my own by watching and learning and doing stuff. But to be able to sit with people now, I really am so proud that the senior people can be positively impactful on others, to sit and say, look, let us help you understand this dynamic and how to succeed within it. And also to support, I think part of our jobs as leaders is also, and this is not my quote, but someone who is one of the few female CEOs of a Fortune 500 company, but part of our job is banging the table for people, trying to break down those doors and saying, consider this person, because the default person usually is one of the men, and sometimes you have to make the louder noise to get someone considered or seen, particularly those women whose style is not aggressively forward. There's a lot of really talented people who are quieter in their approach to their success, and the people who get seen are the ones that are self-promoting and walk and talk with confidence, but aren't necessarily the best at their jobs. Those are the people who are seen and default into these positions. So being someone who is helping to make sure that others are seen and heard, that's part of it too. But Feminist Fridays has been a great thing at our organization, really fun and great and special.
I think that's something everybody should start.
Yes.
We're going to start it.
Start it at Lionsgate this Friday.
What's the one thing, and maybe each of you could just quickly comment on this, what's the one skill that you have now that you didn't have when you were starting out, that you would tell somebody is important to becoming a really good boss?
I can think of a couple things. I know Sandra said it, and I believe this. I think the difference between being a boss and not being a boss is when you're not a boss, you have to get your work done. And when you're a boss, it's actually about their work and not yours. And it's about their timeline and not yours. And so just because I don't really want to approve those photos until Friday, because if I don't approve them on Friday, that means, 5 days go by and they can't do their work. So I think I've had to adjust and just understand that my timeline actually is theirs. So whatever their timeline is, if I'm going to be a good boss, I have to my timeline is theirs. That's like the first thing. The second thing that I think is operating with complete clarity and transparency when it comes to expectations. I think that, again, as an employee, you kind of do what your boss expects. And I think as a boss, you actually have to set the guidelines for what you expect. I know at my past job, there'd be so many times that there was so much wasted time trying to figure out what the boss wanted, because there was just no clarity to the expectations. And so I think laying out clear expectations and being consistent as a boss in terms of your expectations helps your employees be able to react quicker, give you what you want. They're not guessing, and they're not wasting time. So I think those are a couple of things that I kind of learned along the way that maybe as an employee you don't necessarily recognize, but as a boss, I think it can come back to you tenfold in terms of productivity and lessening the frustration of maybe doing a task that you don't want to do. At least if you don't want to do it, you only do it once, as opposed to 3 different times because you're not quite sure how I want it. So I think those are things that I try to make sure that I kind of lay on the table.
Great. And do you guys have anything? And then we're going to do questions.
I was going to say, for me, there are 2 things that when I was an employee, I never thought of that as a boss I think about. One is, you don't think about flexibility, or you're just, as you said, you're just doing your job and trying to do it well, and your job isn't to worry about how everyone else is doing theirs. I think one of the things that I have noticed is flexibility. There are certain people that work with me who don't really like to work from the office. They like to work from Soho House, or they like to be on sets all the time. And in my old position, there would literally be someone at HR going around taking roll call of who's in their office and who isn't. And the truth is, I believe that people get more done if they do it the way they want to do it. I'm not even talking about giving women maternity leave, or I remember Lucy Fisher was like the first person who got to work 4-day weeks, and she got to work that one day at home, and we all were like, why can't we have that job? But there, if you think about Tim Ferriss's book, The 4-Hour Work Week, as far as I'm concerned, you're not going to get paid better if you work a 90-hour week versus a 40-hour week. It's just about how long it takes you to get the job done, and what is the job that you're doing, and how are you doing something more unique or more entrepreneurial. And it just means being flexible with your employees and seeing what works for them. And every time someone says to me, I'm going to be late, because I'm like, I'm not watching over you. I'm not taking roll call. You're an adult. You've been given this position because I believe in you. Do it your way. And everybody does it a different way. And some of the old school people are frustrated, like, where's that employee? Why are they not? And I just say, eyes on your own page. Just do what you're going to do. Don't worry about how everyone else is doing it. That's the first thing. The second thing goes back to what we were talking about before, which is really realizing that when people are having a difficult time and they're making other people's lives difficult in the office, as the boss, you kind of do have to deal with it. So we have had to say to certain people, okay, your voice is really loud, you're on the headset, you're walking out in the hallway, can you just maybe go into your office? Or you're having a nervous breakdown, maybe have the nervous breakdown at home, and then feel free to come back in when you're not. I don't care if, you're out for 2 days. So those are things that I think as a boss, you sort of have to look at that everybody's feeling happy.
Do you have a quickie?
I'll do a quickie. Yeah, I learned as a boss that, and I love Aleen talking about pay people and give them their vacation, but I think what people care about as much as anything is being seen in their jobs. And so many of us, we do a really good job and then it goes into this machine of whatever it is you're doing, and you become part of what's delivered and you don't feel recognized for what you're doing. But if someone in doing their job has someone in a senior role that is paying some measure of attention and giving feedback, even sometimes when it's constructive and says, here's where you're off track, I think you need to pay attention to that. When people feel like someone is paying attention and is invested in them, it's so meaningful. I think that's when people really grow into their roles and they care. If they feel like their boss is invested in them and invested in their success, I think that's more powerful to keeping people in that job than even how much you pay them. And so I try to make sure that with the people that I'm charged with and on some broad level that I'm paying attention and they know I'm paying attention, that I'm seeing their good work and I'm there to help guide them when they're not. And I know even at my level, I have a measure of frustration when I feel like my good work is invisible, and I communicate that. I say, by the way, it would be nice if someone was telling me they're seeing all this hard work I'm doing on your behalf. So that was a lesson for me in terms of the difference between being a leader and not.
Okay, so now we're going to open it up for questions, and if you guys could be really direct, because I'm a better boss than a moderator, so we have a consensus. First question.
Hi, so I own my own business, and I'm great at what I do, but at the hiring part, it's been really, really challenging for me. I've just made every mistake you could make. I've been the book. I think I've turned a corner. Like in the last 6 months, I have a great team, but I would just love to hear about hiring.
So how to be better about hiring? How do you get better about hiring good people?
What's been your trend? Like you didn't like them or they weren't productive?
I mean, I hate to generalize, but a millennial kind of, you expected too much and they quit right away, or they stole clients and then left. I mean, I've had every bad experience you can have, pretty much. And even through vetting and multiple interviews, and I mean, I don't know.
I think one thing that I don't know if you did this or not, but I think one thing that really helps in the circumstances you're describing is the more clear and specific you can be when you hire people, so your expectations are really clear before you hire them.
Yeah, you say it's a terrible job,
Yes.
you won't get promoted for 10 years. And then you see who stays. And then when they're promoted in 3, they're so happy.
She's not wrong. I would do that all the time. I would base level the interview of the worst things. This is purely administrative. You will not be leaving your desk. Because if they're interested in that and then all of a sudden they find out that there's better things.
I mean, I will say the millennial thing, I have currently a lot of young people that are the hardest workers and incredible. And usually I have the younger people that work with me choose the next group of people because I have no idea. And sometimes you're right and sometimes you're wrong. Some of the people that have been the most spectacular people that I've ever had working with me, I would never have known from their experience. Like they didn't come from a particularly impressive previous job and they've been spectacular. And it's something internal that I think you learn growing up. It's just this desire to do well. this passion, desire to do well, going the extra mile, not feeling like you're on a clock, right, as you're starting. So those are the kind of things that if you ask, sometimes they'll say that they will, and then they won't. And unfortunately, you have to go through a few, right, to get to somebody great.
In the white.
Speaking to like millennials, but also people working for you and trying to encouraging them to be better. Like I've had people work for me who are rock stars that I can give tips to, and they get it really quickly and they jump on it. And I have people that are underneath me that I try and be clear and just keep to see not taking. I'm curious if you have any tips for people who have potential, like I believe in them, but there just is like some barrier to them achieving what I'm hoping for them to achieve.
I mean, I would think for me, one thing was to come at it with a sense of compassion, but also relatability. So to try to tell them the situations that I was in where like I didn't do good, or where I failed, or where I disappointed a boss. Because I think sometimes people, as much as they think they can take constructive criticism, they just see it as criticism. Mm-hmm. So sometimes if you can wrap it around kind of a personal story, so they can actually feel that you felt that before, that's been one way that I've been able to break somebody down who just could not, since I was the boss, just could not get to the place of like, you're right, I could do that better. Like just couldn't get there until I actually kind of had to show some of my vulnerability, or, walk out of a meeting and be like, wow, I really shit the bed. I mean, I completely shit the bed in that meeting. And they'd be like, why? And I'd be like, you guys, it happens. And I'm not just saying that. And this is how it happened. And I wasn't prepared, or, because we're not perfect. So that would be my one nugget of advice.
I would say, which I agree with that. It took me a long time to learn something, which was I spent a lot of my early years as a boss when I had to tell people difficult things about their performance or, whatever. I would spend a lot of time, on the, you're really good at this and, all that stuff. And what it created oftentimes with the best of intentions was confusion. And now I have real clarity about when someone is having a performance issue or there's a negative message or you need more, direct is good. And that doesn't mean that you don't do it with kindness. You should always be, constructive and kind and supportive. But I found that when you look people right in the eye and you say, your performance is off, and let me help you understand why. Because if you want to succeed, you need to understand why, and you lay it out, people are so receptive to it. So I think, finding your words, but being as direct and succinct about that message and having them know, I'm telling you this for your benefit. I want you to succeed, but unless you make these corrections, you are not going to. So, I'm going to lay this out for you, and I'm here to support you, but the next step is yours. I think that's helpful.
Do we have time for one more, Dan?
Well, we're only bumping up against lunch, so if you want to go a bit later, that's okay.
We're going to take one more. That one right there.
So thank you all. I was really excited about this. I have a small law firm. I have 9 people on our team. And so I'm wondering, kind of summed up in all of you, the 1-Minute Manager. If any of you haven't read it, it's a great short book. And I'm wondering if you have any other resources, whether it's a podcast, an article, a TED Talk, whatever, that you think would be great learning resources for us.
I've done the Harvard Business Review, just one on emotional intelligence, because for me, it's kind of my basis for everything, and even when hiring and everything like that, I tend to gravitate more toward people who are emotionally intelligent rather than where'd you graduate college and what's your experience and everything like that. So that's one of the books that I've read.
Anybody else?
Anything else?
I think, look, I think if you're passionate about leading well, then you're a constant learner about how to do that. That's how, I've been doing it I'm talking like such an old person up here, but I've been doing this for a long time, but I find it interesting to keep growing in terms of understanding what motivates people and inspires people, I think. And so I think there's, for me, it's not any one thing. It's just, consuming what's out there because I'm interested in it, and being a keen observer of people around you. Because they don't necessarily need to be anointed with some big role so you can say this is an expert, but just watching how people interact and who people respond to and what's effective in both good and bad, so that you can take all of that back, to really make it your own and use that to succeed in your business.
Yeah, I think that the one thing I'm just going to add to that, I always tell people I have one good idea a day, and I do try to learn something every day, and I think the key to learning is listening. And it doesn't have to be a podcast. It doesn't have to be meeting with someone who's on the same level as you or above you. I mean, literally, people talk to each other every day, and taking what you like from people and then not taking the rest, right? Just sticking with the people that have more of what you want to cultivate in your own leadership style. So, okay, we're out of time. I have to tell you guys, the three things, the takeaways, at least from my perspective from this, and I have four because I'm a rule breaker, is the first thing is pay attention, give feedback to people. The second thing is be direct in your communication. The third thing is follow your passion and trust your own instinct. And the fourth thing I have is lift each other up. Mm-hmm. And that's it. Thank you for coming to the panel.
So now that you're inspired by this incredible panel of women, let's continue this feeling. Please visit our website at mptf.com. Follow us on all our social media feeds, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, or if you're so inclined, we'd be so grateful for your support. You can text MPTF to 41444 to make a donation.